Hello, friends, down there in OverPower land. And of course, the few that are rising up the mountain trying to see me in person. I give to you the second of the OverPower basics, universe cards. Universe cards are like the rainbow of OverPower. They are the extreme. On one side, they, right from the beginning of the game, have been some of the most laughing card stock or laughing stock cards of the game, as well as the most powerful, even still to this day, types of cards of the game. We're going to go over all of them today to help you grasp and remember and understand and learn universe cards. So today we're going to kind of go through a few basics. I'm just going to kind of run down what we're going to go through and then we're going to get started. So the first topic we're going to go through today is basic universe cards. So as much as this is the OverPower basics on universe cards, this is now the basic universe card. Loving the pun wordplay there. So basic universe cards started right at the beginning of the game. I believe the beginning of the game they still had this 56 card rule if you were playing events. Of course, events not coming until mission control, so I guess they had a 51 card rule where you had to put 51 cards in your deck. Now, when you start counting out power cards, special cards, and any hero cards early in the game, there really wasn't actually that many cards that you could put in decks. That you were truly overloading decks in the early game with power cards and so on. So a lot of people were actually using a lot of basic universe cards and other types of universe cards that we're going to go through. But the initial basic universe card was a bump to a power card. So you would start off by, of course, seeing the grid color. And at this point, I'm not going to go over grid colors too much. If you're starting off with universe cards as your first podcast from me, interesting choice, but you're going to get into some complicated work as we get through this podcast. But to give you the sense, to use on any sort of card has an icon, which is of course energy, firework blast, fighting, little red fist, strength, which is a dumbbell icon, or intellect, which is a human brain. So on intellect, I'm looking at an intellect basic universe card right now. So on basic intellect universe cards, we may as well use that because it's in my brain. You have a little icon at the top which says to use. And that icon essentially has to correspond to the grid on your character. So you are looking at that icon on your character. Do they have a 6 plus for the sake of a basic universe card? Because let's just say, just for our example, we're using a 6 intellect basic universe card, which of course, as I always love to point out and start with these, because they did not come until later in the game, so they had to actually make basic universe cards for intellect later in the game. So some of them have kind of cooler art and stories behind them, but we will also get into that later in this podcast. So the basics of universe or basic universe cards is that they have this icon to use at the top. So example, again, we are using 6 intellect, so that's a human head, blue human head sort of looking icon. It says 6. So our character has to have a 6 intellect on our team to use it. Of course, our character does, or else why would we be putting it in the deck? And at the bottom, just underneath it, it has another of the exact same icon, which is a blue human head, and it has a +3 in it. Now, of course, this means that our intellect power card for that character will get a bonus of +3. Now, this bonus, of course, does not count towards venture total, and it does not count towards damage. Now, it does, of course, count towards attack or defensive value. So what I mean by that is if they are attacking you with a 10 special card or a 10 boosted attack from their side through a universe card, you then have the ability to use a 7 power card of your own. And in our example here, it's intellect. So a 7 intellect power card, of course, your character having to, of course, have a 7 intellect grid to use such power card. So the 10 attack comes on your character. You may then use this basic universe card to then combine with your 7 intellect to block this attack, because of course the basic universe card giving you a +3 and the power card being a 7, so that's a 10 for the block against either the special or the power card as aforementioned. So a lot of people saying, wow, this is an amazing ability. Why don't people just have a bunch of these in their deck? Well, in Initial Overpower, actually, they did have quite a few of these because a lot of games in Initial Overpower were being won by KO instead of Venture. It was truly a wild, wild west at the beginning as the first couple of sets started to creep out. As the game progressed, though, and as we will get into sort of more advanced podcasts, you learn that card advantage truly is essentially the power of the game of Overpower. So what I mean by card advantage is every card represents some form of either defending or obtaining venture, either through attack or other methods. So when you are now using a card such as a basic universe card as well as a power card, even though it gives you such the advantage that you may defend or attack through a large natured number, it uses 2 cards for 1. So in the game of card advantage, using 2 cards to obtain 1 attack or 1 defense truly obviously does not resolve well. We will kind of get into ways that there is a way to get around that now in the current game slightly, depending on how you build your team. But for basic universe cards, you can see there is truly a great advantage to them, but losing or having to use 2 cards for the sake of 1 action truly puts you at a disadvantage in the Overpower card game. Now, with basics, in our example, we used a 6 plus 3 in the intellect icon, of course, to use, and then 3 to the bonus. Now, in the original game, they went a little haywire with basic universe cards, and they printed every single stat from 6 through 8 in a +1, +2, and +3. I wonder if originally they were just like, power cards are the be all end all of the game, so let's just give a way to boost them, and hopefully everybody's just throwing super large attacks and things just don't measure out mathematically and people are just dying all over the place. The game thankfully got much more strategic than that as further sets went out. But with basic universe cards originally, they did actually create a 6 plus 1, a 6 plus 2, a 6 plus 3, a 7 plus 1, a 7 plus 2, a 7 plus 3, an 8 plus 1, an 8 plus 2, and an 8 plus 3. I can't fathom anybody today truly giving me Of course, recently in a tournament, I did play a 6+2 on a home base, which is something we will discuss later in this podcast, so I won't get too far in it. But I was going to say, I don't think anybody could give me too much of an argument for a reason to play a +1 or a +2 over a +3. Of course, unless they couldn't play a +3, and that might foreshadow something later that we'll discuss. So, of course, you have these +1s, +2s, +3s. So most people, if they even possibly fathom putting these in their deck, they are always at this point using just a +3 variant, which of course is the biggest bonus you can gain through a basic universe card. Now, most people just generally may possibly use one in their deck, and I'm referencing in their main deck, not in terms of some home base. Which again, please don't get disguised. We will discuss home base that allows basic universe cards later on in the podcast. So they have all of these types of basic universe cards. Now, if you put them in your main deck, again, of course, you're only drawing 8 cards. You do have to remember that it is a 2 card for 1 action. So as you're playing out your hand, you're going action for action, action for action. Well, at one point throughout that interaction, you will go these 2 cards for this 1 action, whether it be an attack or a defense. Now, of course, putting that in your main deck, giving you a slight disadvantage as action per action, you will now be down 1 action. So whether it be a venture total or something along those lines of a larger battle, that could devastate you and possibly be the reason why you could lose a whole game. So main decking a basic universe card is not overly recommended, but there could potentially be reasons why you would, and I am open to those thoughts in the comments. Of course, please list underneath. So the next type of universe card is training. Now, again, these were put out in the initial set. These were a boost for lower tiered characters, or a way to boost a secondary stat. Now, in initial Overpower, a lot of the characters, even the strong big baddies, were 6s, so but they gave them 2 6s, so they were 6/6/4 or 6/6/5, which is truly an expensive character in early Overpower if you look at the point totals. So, but they gave these characters the ability to use training cards, or at least if you have a 5 or less in any type of ability. So this gives a lower power card a chance to be a big boy card for once, if you can team it up with a training card. Of course, the same disadvantages do come through a basic universe card, where you will be using 2 cards to represent 1 action, which is either an attack or a defense. So in this situation, the training universe card, instead of being a 6, 7, or 8, so a larger stat to use, it is a smaller stat to use. So it is a 5 or less in a style of stat. So it actually gives even 2 stats on the card that it could potentially represent. So it is truly a 1 size or 2 size fits all. In the early game, that represented 2/3 of the stats, so it was truly a 1 size fits all. So it is a 5 or less. So you're looking at 2 styles of stats. So the basic one to start off with would be a 5 or less energy, and it would start then with a +3. And then underneath it, it would say or a 5 or less strength, and it would also say a +3. So you could choose either stat through a character, and of course use a 5 or less power card to boost with that +3. Now that's actually pretty good if you think you could boost a 5 power card up to a level 8, which could then block a potential 8 power card. feels like it would be a great idea. Well, they actually even created a +4 version. So think of all the stat combinations that you can. Of course, there's of course being one stat on top and one stat being on the bottom, 5 to use or less. And now there is also a +3 and a +4 version. So +4 and +4 or +3 and +3. So now with the +4 version, you actually could even boost a 5 power card stat from somebody to become a 9, which, could even go over a level 8 power card. So in the early game, that was actually quite a huge advantage and huge attack. But of course, remembering that it takes 2 cards to make such attack. And in some courses of the game, through combines and other things we'll discuss later in special cards, there is reason to use 2 cards for 1. Now, main decking those types of 2 cards for 1 is not generally of a smart nature because, of course, again, card advantage being the name of the game, generally an overpower, depending on your deck build and style, always having to be sort of your number one priority. So, alas, with that, training cards falling under the same idea that you can't truly main deck them. Now, again, much like basic universe cards, which we will discuss a little bit later in this podcast, there is a new home base that does allow you to use them. But we will get to that point. So, main decking training cards, not exactly the greatest idea, but again, of course, thinking the example that I just gave you, that you could potentially get a 9 attack on somebody in that nature. Now, there was also a promo given out at tournaments recently where there is a 5 any power or less to use, and it has a 1-time +5 any power on the other side. So, of course, with that being the case, you can actually make a 10 attack or a 10 defense with a 5 power card. Quite a powerful card, but of course, again, main decking something along those lines and creating a 2-for-1 nature, not the greatest advantage in overpower. So, as you can see, these basic universe cards, although maybe being necessary in the early game to fill out deck totals, quickly fell out of vogue as the game progressed with more cards that you could fill your deck with. So, I get to the point of the big boy card of the universe, of the universe. Funny enough. So the big boy card of the universe is the teamwork card. Now, this is the other end of the spectrum, as I was speaking about, possibly one of, still today, the best cards in Overpower. So what this teamwork card is, it is an ability to string power card attacks after an initial universe card. Now, I know you're saying, well, Marcel, you said universe cards are never a good idea because they're always a 2-for-1. Well, the 2-for-1 aspect is that the universe card doesn't have any venture, which I mean damage total, which either sticks to the character or is added to the venture total, where at the end of a battle we determine who wins that battle and who wins the missions. But in the terms of a teamwork card, it's different because yes, it does have the same idea of a value to use. So there's still the idea of an icon on the side, and it does have a 6, 7, or 8. Those are the 3 that it represents on the side. And what I mean by that is you again will have a fighting icon, which is the little red fist. And it'll have a 6 inside of it, and that's a 6 to use. So your character on their grid total has to have a 6, 7, or 8 to have the ability to use that teamwork of a 6 to use. And then after that universe card actually has a total for venture or for attack or for both actually. So right beside for our fictitious 6 fighting, it will actually say 6 fighting attack to use essentially. So when you play that, it's actually the universe card itself is acting as a 6 fighting attack that they have to now actually defend, as it will hit their character and go towards either, or go towards both venture and damage total. And spectrum, of course. So, as you can see already, there is a major benefit to teamwork cards because right there initially you get a 6 to attack. So your character also having the ability to have a universe placing slot, which we'll get to in a second. You can see how this card, having the ability to have several of these on your characters, could actually create a wonderful scenario for you. Even still to this day, that teamwork cards reign supreme because of that effect. Well, there is also a benefit, and I guess some might say a detriment to universe cards, as they also have the ability to throw additional power cards afterwards. Now, on teamwork cards right underneath, it will also say +1. I believe it could say up to +2. And in some cases, it can say also up to +3. Now, it will give 2 options underneath. So in our fictitious example, in our teamwork, we have a 6 fighting to use. Right beside it, it will say 6 attack fighting, of course, icon. And then underneath it will say 1 energy, +1 energy. And it will say right beside that +2 strength. Now, the reason it gives it in both icons underneath in sort of a crisscross fashion is because you can make either 1 or 2 follow-ups. Now, with a teamwork, they did make a rule early on that you must follow up a teamwork at least with 1 power card. So you cannot just throw a teamwork by itself in a game of OverPower. You actually have to throw a power card with it. So in our fictitious example, of course, we have a +1 energy or a +2 strength. In our example, we'll just throw a 3 energy power card with it, which will turn into a +4 energy, or sorry, a 4 energy attack on their character. So you have to be careful with teamwork universe cards because as the game progressed, there were a lot of specials that started to avoid certain cards with certain icons. Now, a teamwork, even though in our example it acts as a 6 fighting attack, as you can imagine it on the top with 2 fighting icons, it does also have the icon of the energy and the strength underneath it. So if there was on their side example a card that said avoid 1 attack with a strength icon, well, the way it would actually work is that 4 energy that we actually just threw technically is also getting plussed by the teamwork, which had a strength icon on it. Thus, a very unique, convoluted way to avoid an energy icon with a special that says avoid 1 card with a strength icon on it. And just a unique way to show you how OverPower gets quite unique and strategic by the time you get to GOAT status, of course. So just to sort of show you the power of teamworks, and then of course show you unique ways you can stop them. But it was more representation to show you that the teamwork itself is always in play. So that power card that we followed up the teamwork with was still attached to that initial teamwork because it was getting the +1 bonus. Now, uniquely enough, with Teamworks, the greatest thing is, as we've discussed in other podcasts, and we may discuss more in the future, KOing a character often can get to the point where you either need 20 points or you need 3 icons of different nature. Now, with a teamwork, you're allowed to throw 2 follow ups. So, the reason teamworks are so dangerous is because when you throw the first initial attack, you can then follow up right away with 2 follow ups of power cards. So, if you're throwing a multi power card plus a regular power card, and there are 2 different icons other than the teamwork, of course, then that's a KO to the character through Spectrum KO. Now, there's also other types of teamworks or types of scenarios where you could throw an offsuit teamwork and match it up with the main icons of your deck and throw larger through like a 6, 7, 8, which would then, of course, be of the nature of a cumulative KO. So as we see, teamworks are quite valuable cards. Now, you always have to remember, though, when it comes to teamworks, you always need power cards to fuel them. You can't throw them by themselves. So power cards, of course, as mentioned in the Power Card podcast, are the lifeblood of the game. So you need them sometimes to block, you need them sometimes to attack, so you need them also for different reasons throughout the game. So to have them available for the use of a teamwork card is not always your first priority and is not always the main priority. There's been scenarios where I've had 3 teamworks placed, but I saw and only had 2 power cards in my hand, but I saw the opportunity off the first teamwork to throw both power cards and kill a character. Yeah, it made my other 2 teamworks unusable for that round. Of course, it was not a round where someone was venturing for the win, because then, of course, every venture point total counts. But I saw the opportunity where if I could just kill that character right away, then all of a sudden they may have other cards in their hand that could potentially be unusable for that particular round, or moving forward, there could be discards where I still get to actually keep those teamworks. Momentary disadvantage for potential future large gains. So just to show you a few sort of basic strategic ideas where there could potentially be reasons why follow-ups and power cards and choice of power cards of follow-ups and you know where you sort of place your power cards to teamworks is always a unique conversation as well. But before we get to that, I just want to reference one thing, because a lot of people have this question when it comes to teamworks, is what is a duplicate of a teamwork? So that references usually the 2 U's. I don't believe there's too many teamworks, or any that I can think of off the top of my head, where the value of the attack is different than the 2 U's. So what I reference by that is the icon, not the actual value of the attack. A teamwork always in the game of OverPower, at least in the older game of OverPower. As I say, OverPower is progressing through different stages currently. But the game I'm teaching you about, and that always the attack value is a 6. So it'll be a 6 icon to use. So that reference will be on the actual card itself. The to use in terms of the ability to use that teamwork, it might be different, but the actual value of attack will always be a 6. So in our fictitious example we used earlier, it was a 6 fighting to use, and then afterwards it was a 6 fighting attack. So now there is also a 7 fighting to use and an 8 fighting to use. Now in OverPower, They also did a few unique things, as the value of teamworks kind of did change lightly from the first one to the second one, but it really only changed through one stat, and that was through the ATUs. So in the ATUs, the original started off with a +1 and a +3, and if you happen to use that teamwork by mistake, you will only get a +1 to +3. But in later sets, they corrected that to +2 and +3. So 8 to use teamworks, of course, having the biggest plus to use value afterwards. So as you can see, being quite valuable in a deck. So to give you an example, an 8 fighting to use is still only a 6 fighting attack when it's thrown on the table against an opponent's character, but the plus range after is a +2 and a +3. So in our example before, it was energy and strength. We'll use it again. So it would be a 6 fighting attack on the character. And then afterwards, we could use a power card. Of course, anything from a multi-power card to a regular power card from one of our characters, as long as our range on stat character is good. And it would be a +2. So if we threw a 4 multi-power card, on our example, it would be a 4 energy attack plus a 2. So it would be a 6 energy attack. So as you can see, you could boost cards quite quickly to large values. So ATU's values are quite valuable teamworks out there. Of course, thinking about, though, in the duplicate area of teamworks, you do have to think of only the to use value, not the attack value. So in our example, 6 fighting to use teamwork, a 7 fighting to use teamwork, and an 8 fighting to use teamwork would all not be duplicates of each other. However, if I had 2 6 fighting teamworks in my hand, or drawn and one is placed, and of course usable from my character, then it doesn't matter what the follow-ups are on those teamworks. Even if the one teamwork has energy strength and the other teamwork has intellect fighting, or sorry, it can't have fighting on it. The other one has intellect strength. It doesn't matter, because the top line is what matters. So the 6 fighting to use and another 6 fighting to use, again, even if it has different follow-ups, are duplicates of each other in the same hand. So you cannot have 2 of those in the exact same hand. A lot of people actually don't know that rule and will put multiples in there thinking that they can keep them in the same hand, but they cannot. So again, it's the to use value. And of course, that goes the same with all of the basic universe cards as well. So the +1, the +2, the +3. I believe, according to the initial rule book, that the plus value is not of the nature. It would actually be, they could potentially be duplicates of each other. I'm unsure of that. I'll have to get back to you on a further podcast as I look into the rules on the basic and the training. But again, as we progress, there is home bases now that have made those quite playable. So we move to the placing aspect of universe cards. So every character has a universe card placing slot on them, including the reserve character. Now, of course, if you place something to the reserve character, unless they have access to that universe card, it is not a duplicate moving forward in progressive hands. But as we move on, you generally place most of your universe cards on your front line 3, giving you 3 universe placing slots to have access to. In this situation, a lot of people play a little bit heavier on the teamworks and will sometimes have some even coming out of their hands in general battles or ally cards. Now, as we get to the placing idea, I do want to sort of just say that you generally should try to fill all of your placing slots. This is not a placing podcast. This is just a universe card podcast. So, the idea of overpower is card advantage. So placing is always advantageous in this game. You do have a placing slot for universe cards, so generally filling up those universe card placing slots in a strategic way to the way you've built your deck is a good way to go. There may be strategic reasons why you've decided not to place them, but generally placing them and having them moving forward in the game is always a great idea. So I'm not really going to talk too much about placing universe cards other than always remembering that where you place your universe card, whether it be a teamwork or an ally card, which we're about to discuss, is always strategic because you always have to remember that universe cards always need fuel. So whether it be a teamwork needing the fuel of a power card, or what we're about to discuss, an ally needing the fuel of a special card, then you always have to remember placing the universe card on one character and remembering that the fuel for the universe card needs to be placed on the other character, or at least coming from a hand where the other character has access to it. So with that being said, we move on to the cousin of the universe card, but still under the universe umbrella, the ally card. The ally card was created, I want to say it started in DC. It was one of the unique Overpower Asterix cards early on and immediately right away, where early on ally cards, it again looked very similar to a teamwork card. So it had anywhere ranging from a 5, 6, 7, or 8 to use. So it would be 5 or less to use, of course. And then it would be 6 or more to use, 7 more or to use, 8 or more to use. And the numbering beside them would be 5 or less to use. And for our example, we'll use energy. And it would be a 3 energy attack. Now, the early ones, of course, coming out in DC loving to do things a little bit differently, so they had a brand new card come out called the Ally. So early versions of it said teammate may play one special card. So early versions allowed you to have this card, throw it as an attack, and then not actually follow it up. Later versions, and of course these early versions getting an errata to follow suit of the later versions, saying that you must play a special card to follow this up. Now, an ally card, of course, being like a teamwork card, coming from one character, and the follow-up always having to come from another character. So sort of like a mini teamwork combo, 1-2 punch ally, on your side with you. One of the early ones I do remember in the game, especially when DC came out, was the Scarecrow. I loved it because it had Scarecrow under this big full moon, and Joker was just in the back, almost like, it was a twosome, an ally. So it was a really cool visual for me early on that I loved, just mentally. So these ally attacks, they provided the idea that it wasn't power card that fueled the universe. It was actually special cards that fueled the universe cards. So there was a lot more speed all of a sudden adapted in the game to create a faster pace to the game. Instead of a rule change, they just created a new card that created a faster pace and an ability to KO. Now, the 5 or less to use plus 3, obviously being a great card because that generally is in a suit that's not your main suit in a deck. So a great card to add as both speed and a way to shoot off a special card that may have potentially be slower on one of your characters. Now, of course, the 6, 7, and 8 being respectively a 6-1, a 7-2, and an 8-3. Now, these not seeing too much play because, of course, yes, you do get the venture total from it, but however, these are generally in your main suit of your deck, so you're not often needing smaller attacks in the main suit that your deck is already is already representing through power cards or potentially special cards. So those don't often get to see much play. However, there is some reason to always put cards in your deck of Overpower, and if you have a larger build or a ton of specials, there could potentially be a reason why you would actually play one of these, needing a little bit more speed or a few other cards for your deck. So there's always a reason to play these cards as you move on. Ally cards, I think I've learned to love them as I've gone on. Initially, I was very against them and thought it was just too low of a number. However, learning that speed is an asset to be used at different times of the game of Overpower, I can see a place for allies, and they've definitely won a place in my heart. That's for sure. They are generally in most decks that I build, even to this current day. So before we get into so of course, sorry, just to finalize with allies, always remembering that they are just like teamworks and they must have a follow-up afterwards. So you have the 5, the 6, the 7, the 8, and of course their value afterwards. They generally are really nice in terms of you can do sort of offsuit style attacks with them, especially with the 5-3 range. It coming in generally the offsuit, it's always nice to sort of throw those before special for Spectrum KO reasons later on with different teamworks that might be generally in more of your main suit, as they need 6s, 7s, and 8s to sort of use as their might fall a little bit more into your main suit category. So these sort of offsuit lower ally attacks are generally really nice in that regard, that you can find maybe a little bit more Spectrum KO power in your deck. So with that, I bring myself to talk about a unique ally that came out a little bit later after the original ones. And this brings me to a topic that I kind of want to discuss in general with you, and I'm going to luckily be able to go through a few different things. If you do remember earlier in this podcast, I did mention in the training portion or the training card portion that there was an Any Power training card promo card that came out. So I want to discuss Any Powers a little bit right now, and I'm going to start through the use of allies. So in allies later on, they came out with an Any Power ally. So what I mean by that is the to use portion would be 6 Any Power. So this means that on your character's power grid, any character that had a 6 in any suit could use this ally card as 6 Any Power. And beside it, it would have a 1. Now the 1, of course, would be the attack to use, as we mentioned earlier with ally cards. And it would be a, for example, 1 energy, or a 1 fighting, or a 1 strength, or a 1 intellect. Now, these were meant as sort of like little offsuits, sort of shots in decks. And, a lot of people laugh at these when people put them in decks, but I can tell you in tournament play that, despite, my deck not having stuff along those lines, you do still have to deal with them when they come at you. And knowing that that's an offsuit in someone's deck, there are many a times where I've had to use a 1-9 special card or an 8 power card to block these sort of things. For the sake of not having a character die or anything along those lines, funny enough. But the reason I wanted to start talking about that is, Any Power itself, it doesn't actually count when it comes towards Spectrum or Spectrum KO towards a character. Now, in this example of the ally card, there's no actual fight or attack going across the board. However, in the next example I'm going to give you, which was again actually a promo card that was accidentally inserted in a set way back in the day called Classic, and this was an any power teamwork. So we just went over teamworks earlier in the podcast, so you understand how they work now. So the way the any power teamwork worked was it would be a 6 any power to use, as I always mentioned on the first side, but it would be a 6 any power attack as the actual value of the card. Now, remember what I just said. Any power doesn't actually have an icon. So it's not unlike multi-powers, which acts as any icon you want it to be. Any power has no icon to it whatsoever. So I never mentioned this in power cards because it's very straightforward in that respect. So you can use the number as long as your character can use that number for either the power card or the universe card. However, it doesn't actually act as anything other than the value on the card itself. So in this example for the teamwork, it is a 6 any power to use, and then it is a 6 any power attack to defend. So if the character gets attacked with this, the opponent then has to decide, okay, if this attack hits, it's not actually going to affect venture total, so most likely they're going to have to go after a cumulative KO on this character. Now, the 6 any power teamwork also was unique because it has a +0/+0. Now, a funny short story about the 6 any power teamwork is that it wasn't seeing a lot of play when it first came out, and it probably sat idle for about a couple years. I finally decided at one point that I looked at it and I said, hey, you know, there is actually one supreme benefit to this teamwork, and I decided to play it in a very famous tournament in the Renaissance era of the OverPower world. And there was a very unique moment because the one thing I realized about the any power teamwork is that you can use the follow-ups instead of other teamworks generally being your offsuits. This one you could follow up with your main suits, thus creating like a higher cumulative style KO right away with this teamwork. Really powerful mechanic, especially in Overpower, because a lot of the times, you know, there's characters that are just left unprotected. And in this particular tournament, there's a very famous moment on camera where a person left a character unprotected, and I had the 6 any power teamwork, a 6 power card, and an 8 power card in my hand. And I played all 3 on a character and just killed them right there on the spot. And the opponent was definitely not expecting that. And since that day, a lot of people have given a lot of respect to the any power teamwork, and it's quite still seen on the scene. Now, they did follow suit and in a promo give another any power teamwork out, and this was the 7 any power teamwork. So now this was 7 any power to use, still of course following teamwork suit, a 6 any power attack. Now this one a little bit different as it was both a +0 and a +1, and they created it as a 1 per deck. However, of course, the 6 any power teamwork not being a 1 per deck, and you can play as many as you want, but of course remembering that every 6 any power teamwork is a duplicate of itself. So with that being said, I hope you understand the any power aspect of it. It does not count towards Spectrum KO, but it does count towards every other respect in that regard. So that brings me to the final thought of the 2 new home bases that were created. These 2 new home bases were created recently as ways to make basic universe cards and training universe cards playable. The first one in its current state being called Dracula's Armory, It does cost 3 deck building points to use. Now, these 3 deck building points have to come from the deck building total of your characters. Now, that total being 76, or for quick reference, 19-point average on all of your characters. So, of course, if you want to use Dracula's Armory, one of your characters has to cost 16 points, or you have to take it from some sort of aspect, just to give you the idea of it. What this home base does is it does give you the ability to place three non-duplicate basic universe cards. So you can have a 6+3, a 7+3, and an 8+3, or 6+3, a 6+2, and a 7+3 on there. And you're allowed to access them once per battle. So you're only allowed to use, it doesn't matter, you can use only once per battle. So you can't use all 3 of them in one battle. So once per battle, you're allowed to add them to an action. So either an attack or a defense. Now, this gives you the ability to sort of either boost a power card for, to go over special card attacks, or the ability to boost power cards to defend against larger attacks as well. Great, great, great home base in my mind. Well worth the points, but of course you always have to think of the strategy of your deck and can you afford those points depending on who you want on your deck. So the other one that they created as well was Spartan Training Ground. Now this one uses training universe cards. You're allowed the same idea. 3 non-duplicate training universe cards on there, and you're allowed to access them once per battle for one action, either offense or defense. If you remember earlier when we spoke about training cards, I did say there was quite a benefit to them, as it was your offsuit, and you are allowed to boost a 5 or lower all the way up to potentially a 9, 8, 7, something along those lines, depending on, of course, the power card and the training card bonus. Now, really nice. This one, however, costing 2 deck building points. Now, a little bit easier to fit on a lot of decks, so you do have the potential to sort of slide it in as a home base depending on which characters you're trying to put on your team, but not giving you such the great advantage because, of course, training cards generally boosting lower stats, whereas basic universe cards like in Dracula's Armory can boost larger or your main stat sort of ideas. So really 2 nice home bases that have kind of given training and basic universe cards a new breath of life as we continue forward. So I think that's going to give you a general idea of universe cards in the OverPower landscape at the moment. Again, this is just a basic sort of conceptual idea of them in general. I just want to say thank you again for listening to OverPower Basics. This is Universe Cards. Subscribe, like, and write some comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks again. OverPower GOAT, 10,000 feet above the OverPower land.